Turn your Bibles to Daniel chapter 8. We'll begin with verses 14 through 16. We are studying the prophecy of the kings of the south and north. This is the third in that study. And we're going to see in this lesson the rise of Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, I will be the first to admit it's confusing because these kings have names that are so familiar. We've had several Antiochuses, several Seleucids, several Ptolemies, and it's difficult to keep them straight in our mind, what century, what year, which one. So please continue to bear with us. When the book comes out, you'll be able to maybe keep it a little more precise in your minds. But verse 14 says, "Now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men..."
Wait just a second.
I'm
You
sorry?
said chapter 8. You mean chapter 11?
Yes, chapter 11.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
Okay.
I'm seeing if you're following me, okay? Chapter 11, verse 14.
There you go.
"Now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power." Antiochus the Great had persuaded Philip of Macedon to unite with him and to attack Egypt. In response to the alliance between Antiochus and Philip, Ptolemy Epiphanes sends his general Scopas into Syria to engage them. But he was routed, and a large part of his army was destroyed. Now, Scopas, probably a name not totally familiar with you. I had to kind of Google him and get in my mind who he was, but he was a Greek from the region of Aetolia. Aetolia is the region in Greece on the north coast of the Gulf of Corinth, just north of Achaia. And after being on the losing side in what is called the Social War, which was from 220 BC to 217 BC, Scopas moved away from Greece, moved to Alexandria in Egypt. And there, Ptolemy put him in charge of part of his army and sent him to fight against Antiochus the Great and Philip. His campaign was successful at first, bringing the province of Judea under the control again of Ptolemy. But he was later defeated at the Battle of Panium in 200 BC. And that battle has come up in several of these prophecies already. However, he continued in the favor of Ptolemy after this defeat, and he was given positions of authority within the kingdom there of Egypt. In time, he determined to seize control of the kingdom for himself, but he was caught and executed in 196 BC. Definitely, this was not a good time in history to be a king or a general, because there were all these conspiracies going back and forth. And in this region, between Syria, Judea, Egypt, in that area there was just continued struggling between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And you had a lot of turncoats going from one side to the other and things like that, just not very nice. And then you had family members killing each other and trying to take over their respective kingdoms. Well, the prophecy says that violent men of your people come to the aid of Antiochus in defeating the Ptolemies. The King James Version calls them robbers. The Greek word is peritz, meaning violent or tyrant. These were Jewish people of questionable reputation who revolted against Ptolemy and joined in with Antiochus. They were interested in getting Ptolemy out of their land and feeling that the Seleucids would perhaps be better masters than were the Ptolemies. However, their motive was not political or a desire to free themselves from Ptolemy, but they joined Antiochus for a misguided religious reason. And the prophecy says exactly what it was: to exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision. That was the motive of these Jewish rascals. Their goal was to help Antiochus defeat Ptolemy so they could go into Egypt and build a temple like that one in Jerusalem. Their inspiration was based on Isaiah chapter 30, verses 18 through 25, which in their thinking seems to say that the Jews and the Egyptians should be one people. Read this for you, and if you can figure out how it says that, would you please let me know, because I've read through it several times, and I don't get out of this statement in Isaiah what these guys are thinking. It says, "Therefore the Lord will wait, that he may be gracious to you, and therefore he will be exalted, that he may have mercy on you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him. For the people shall dwell in Zion at Jerusalem. You shall weep, excuse me, you shall weep no more. He will be very gracious to you at the sound of your cry. When he hears it, he will answer you. And though the Lord gives you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet your teachers will not be moved into a corner anymore. But your eyes shall see your teachers, your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. Whenever you turn to the right hand, or whenever you turn to the left, you will also defile the covering of your graven images of silver, and the ornament of your molded images of gold. You will throw them away as an unclean thing. You will say to them, get away. Then he will give the rain for your seed, which you sow the ground, and bread of the increase of the earth. It will be fat and plentiful. In that day your cattle will feed in large pastures. Likewise the oxen and the young donkeys that work the ground will eat cured fodder, which has been winnowed with the shovel and fan. There will be on every high mountain and on every high hill rivers and streams of waters in the day of the great slaughter, when the towers fall." How they could get out of that the Jews and the Egyptians should be one people, and that this was instructions for them to move into Egypt and build a temple there, it's lost on me. So maybe if you have that understanding, you can explain it to me. But unfortunately for these Jewish people, while they helped Antiochus to defeat Ptolemy, their actions actually foreshadowed calamities that would later fall on themselves as Antiochus turned on them and plundered their land to feed his army. The prophecy also says, "But he," meaning Antiochus, "who comes against him," meaning Ptolemy, "shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power." So, we see that the Seleucids finally are victorious over the Ptolemies, and for a little while they have dominion over the land of Egypt. The next paragraph we'll look at is verses 17 through 19. "He shall also set his face to enter with strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it. But she shall not stand with him or be for him. After this he shall turn his face to the coastlands, and shall take many. But a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach removed he shall turn back on him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. The Jews in this paragraph are referred to as the upright ones. And we see here that the Jews are rebelling now against Antiochus the Great because of the mistreatment they received at his hand. So now they side with Ptolemy. Keep in mind, Ptolemy Epiphanes was only 18 when he ascended the throne of Egypt. So Antiochus tries another approach rather than to continue the war. Instead, he gives the daughter of women, that is, his daughter Cleopatra, in marriage to Ptolemy. That's the Cleopatra that you see in the movie and Mark Antony and all that kind of thing that went on. That's the Cleopatra that's involved here. And Antiochus gives her to Ptolemy to be his wife. So here you have this young king being married to this woman and uniting the houses of the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Now this seems to make sense in the mind of Antiochus. He promised to give some land as her dowry, and this land included the province of Judea. That was certainly an enticement to the Ptolemies. They had just lost it. Now he's wanting to give it back to them as the dower of his daughter so that the Ptolemies and the Seleucids would be joined together in this marriage. Now, at first, this may sound somewhat counterproductive to the fact that Antiochus had just taken back Judea and he just whipped the Ptolemies. But in his mind, he was thinking the marriage would eventually give him control over Syria, Cilicia, Lycia, and Egypt, as well as Judea. In other words, all that the Ptolemies had jurisdiction over would come under his hand, and he would be the king over the entire Middle East and North Africa. That was the thinking in his mind. Prophecy says, though, she shall not stand with him or be for him. It seemed that Cleopatra loved her husband more than she loved her father. And so she took the side of Ptolemy against her father. Seems to me that Antiochus the Great should have read the book of Daniel before he did this. But he didn't. And so it did not work out. Verse 18 says, after this, he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many. Having given up now on defeating Ptolemy, he decides to take on the Romans of all people. And for his efforts, he did conquer many of the islands off the coastland of Asia Minor that belonged to Italy and to Greece. He successfully invaded Greece in 192 BC. And he was also elected commander-in-chief of the Aetolian League. This was a league amongst Greeks that was somewhat at odds with the Macedonians. However, in 191 BC, the Romans defeated him at Thermopylae, driving him back to Asia Minor. And by 188 BC, Antiochus was forced to leave Asia Minor, go back to Syria. He then began an expedition to the east, and he was killed in Elymaeus, which is in Persia, in 187 BC. As the prophecy predicted, he shall stumble and fall and not be found. The next paragraph is verses 20 through 24. It says, there shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. And in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of royalty. But he shall come in peaceably, and seize the kingdom by intrigue. With the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. The successor to Antiochus the Great was his older son, Seleucus Philopator, who reigned from 187 BC to 175 BC. Due to the defeat of the Seleucids by Rome, the Seleucids were under heavy war tribute to Rome. The solution Seleucus decided upon was to, as the prophecy says, impose taxes on the glorious kingdom. This means that he sent a man by the name of Heliodorus to Jerusalem to take all that was in the temple treasury to pay the Romans. It wasn't nearly enough, but he looted the temple to pay the Romans the war debt. The New Living Bible paraphrases verse 20. You might want to compare your version with this. It's interesting. His successor will be remembered as the king who sent a tax collector into Israel. But after a very brief reign, he will die mysteriously, neither in battle nor in riot. On his return to Jerusalem, Seleucus was assassinated by his man Heliodorus. After Heliodorus assassinated Seleucus, he seized the throne for himself. Now, the true heir to the throne was a young man by the name of Demetrius, who was the older son of Seleucus. But at this time, he was in Rome being held as a hostage. So it was not possible for him to sit on the throne there in Judea, in that part of the country. However, the younger brother of Demetrius, a man by the name of Antiochus IV, whom we know as Antiochus Epiphanes, ousted Heliodorus and made the infant son of Seleucus, who was also named Antiochus, the formal head of state. Well, I tell you, it really gets confusing with all these names, doesn't it? You know, the Epiphanes and the Antiochuses and the Seleucus and the Ptolemies. But I think you recognize Antiochus Epiphanes as a name that's not a good name in history. If the Seleucids before him were bad, Antiochus Epiphanes was the worst of all. So he took this infant son of Seleucus, also named Antiochus, and made him the head of state. However, in just a few years, Antiochus Epiphanes had him murdered and took the throne for himself and reigned from 175 BC until his death in 164 BC. The prophecy in verse 21 calls Epiphanes a vile person. Now I'd like to read from 3 commentaries that give us an idea of why Antiochus Epiphanes was called a vile person. Matthew Henry comments on the vileness of Epiphanes. He writes, "He shall be a vile person. He called himself Epiphanes, the illustrious." That's what the word Epiphanes means. But his character was the reverse of his surname. The heathen writers describe him to be an odd-humored man, rude and boisterous, base and sordid. Not very good adjectives, right? He would sometimes steal out of the court into the city and herd with any infamous company incognito. In disguise, he made himself a companion of the common sort and of the basest strangers that came to town. He had the most unaccountable whims, so that some took him to be silly, others to be mad. Hence, he was called Epiphanes, which means the madman. He is called a vile person, for he had been a long time a hostage at Rome for the fidelity of his father when the Romans had subdued him. And it was agreed that when the other hostages were exchanged, he should continue a prisoner at large. So Epiphanes had some resentment against his own family because he was also held hostage, and when others were let go, he was held back. Adam Clarke concurs in what Dr. Henry writes. He writes, "This was Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes the Illustrious. They did not give him the honor of the kingdom. He was at Athens on his way from Rome when his father died, and Heliodorus had declared himself king, as had several others. But Antiochus came in peaceably, for he obtained the kingdom by flatteries. He flattered Eumenes, king of Pergamus, and Attalus, his brother, and got their assistance. He flattered the Romans and sent ambassadors to court their favor and pay them the arrears of the tribute." That was the money that Heliodorus was sent by Seleucus to pay the Romans. Didn't get paid all the money that they were due, but Antiochus Epiphanes comes up with the money to pay the Romans and get in good with them. He sent ambassadors to their court, the Roman court, in order to court their favor and pay them the arrears of the tribute. He flattered the Syrians and gained their concurrence. And as he flattered the Syrians, so they gave him giving him the epithet Epiphanes the Illustrious. Before that, he was what the prophet here calls a vile person, is fully evident from what Polybius says of him in the book that he wrote. He was every man's companion. He resorted to the common shops and prattled with the workmen. He frequented the common taverns and ate and drank with the meanest fellows, singing debauched songs, etc., etc. On this account, a contemporary writer and others after him, instead of Epiphanes, called him Epiphanes, the madman. And then Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown in their classic commentary adds this: "This evil successor is Antiochus Epiphanes the Illustrious, who vindicates the claims of the royal line against Heliodorus. He was later nicknamed Epiphanes, that is, the madman, which rhymes with Epiphanes. This king caroused with the lowest class of people, bathed with them in public baths, and foolishly joked and threw rocks at passers-by. His crafty method of substituting himself in his nephew Demetrius's place as rightful heir of the throne made him well deserving of the term evil." So you see, Antiochus Epiphanes was not a man you would want for your best friend. I don't think you'd want him living in the house next to yours. I don't think you'd even want him living in the same state as you live in. The prophecy says that Epiphanes comes in with the force of a flood. Epiphanes arrived in Judea and overthrew all the competitors for the crown like a flood. The prophecy also says that he removes the prince of the covenant. Onias was the high priest in Jerusalem when Epiphanes arrived. Epiphanes removed Onias and replaced him with his brother Jason, who had given him a large sum of money. Now keep in mind, Epiphanes had given money to the Romans to get them on his side. And now Jason is making a payoff to Antiochus Epiphanes for putting him in the position of the high priesthood. So, what does Epiphanes do to show his appreciation to Jason? Well, he's the high priest for a while, but then he puts Jason out of office and makes a man by the name of Menelaus high priest after he had given him a larger sum of money. And the thing about Menelaus was he was not even of the tribe of Aaron, the family of Aaron. So he was not a legitimate successor to the high priesthood. But Menelaus had money. Epiphanes wanted money, so Menelaus got the job. And Menelaus then had Jason secretly assassinated so that there could not be any going back to Jason. Epiphanes enters peaceably into the richest province. That's what the prophecy says. Adam Clarke explains for us. He became profuse in his liberalities and scattered among them the prey of his enemies, the spoil of temples, and the riches of his friends, as well as his own revenues. He spent much in public shows and bestowed largesses among the people. We are told in 1 Maccabees 3, verse 30, that in the liberal giving of gifts, he abounded above all the kings that went before him. These are nearly the words of the prophet, and perhaps without any design to copy them on the part of the apocryphal writer, he would sometimes go into the streets and throw about a handful of money, crying out, "Let him take it to whom fortune sends it." It's called buying influence. He didn't have to worry about being elected. You know, we do have elections in our country, and isn't it interesting how that politicians will go around and they won't necessarily throw money in the streets and say, "Let him take it to whom fortune sends it," but they will certainly do their best to buy influence and buy votes. It's interesting, some of the stories I've already heard in the news about vote buying in some of the cities in the United States of America. It is also said that Epiphanes would do what his fathers and forefathers were not able to do. In verse 23, he makes a league that eventually gives him control of Egypt, which no Seleucid king had ever done. The classic commentary explains for us, referring to the alliance that was made between Antiochus Epiphanes and Ptolemy VII. After early military success by Ptolemy VII, surnamed Philometor, against Antiochus Epiphanes, the tables turned, and Antiochus took Ptolemy captive. The Egyptians, thinking they had lost their king for good, assigned his younger brother Ptolemy Physcon, I'll get it right in just a moment, to the throne. The prophecy says that Antiochus acted deceitfully. Antiochus worked deceitfully by turning again to support Ptolemy VII, Philometor, invading Egypt against Ptolemy Physcon, and returning Ptolemy VII, Philometor, to the throne. You got that straight? This is confusing. I mean, he's playing these guys against each other. In this way, Antiochus Epiphanes was able to force an alliance with Egypt and demand all the advantages. Antiochus, in essence, took control of the Egyptian kingdom, making it a part of his own. And the prophecy says he would do this with a small number of people. He was able to take control of Egypt without a great army because he did it through deceit. The prophecy says he shall do that which his fathers have not done. His mastery of Egypt was something never done before, and a feat envied by all his predecessors. And then the prophecy says that he dispersed among them the plunder, spoil, and riches. The comment says, but he will only share his conquered lands with his followers and for a time. Antiochus had unopposed control in Egypt for only a short time. The alliance soon wore thin, and Ptolemy Philometor made an alliance with his deposed brother, Physcon, to push out Antiochus's troops. Antiochus responded with an all-out attack, but was stopped by the intervening Romans who forced his retreat. You see that Rome is becoming to be the world power at this point in time. Now he devises plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. Again, Adam Clark explains for us. The guardian of the young Egyptian king Ptolemy Philometor demanded from Antiochus the restitution of Chalcedon and Palestine, which he refused. He foresaw that he might have a war with that kingdom, and therefore he forecast devices, that is, fixed a variety of plans to prevent this, visited the strongholds and frontier places to see that they were in a state of defense, and this he did for a time. He employed some years in hostile preparations against Egypt. And this is where we're going to stop for the time being. He's preparing for another war with the Ptolemies.